You know what this is. It's WeatherBrains, episode number 660. This is the pre-show. Magical time of the show. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and occasionally say very, very outrageous things. Thank you. This is for September 10th. And most weather weenies know what September the 10th is. This represents the climatological peak of the Atlantic hurricane season. So guess what we're going to be talking about tonight? Probably the Atlantic hurricane season. We're doing this on an evening where we have 3 active hurricanes. We have an active invest and all kind of stuff to talk about here. So here we go. Bill Murray is out. He is at 50-cent beer night at Hooters. Kevin Selly is out, has a health issue with his dad. Our prayers are with him.
Absolutely.
But us old men, we're tough old buzzards, Brian. We are tough buzzards.
Sometimes
man.
I wonder.
Come on, man. Think about it. We're still here. Who'd have thunk it?
Yeah.
At our ripe old age. But anyway, Kevin is tending to his dad, and we certainly pray that he recovers quickly. A little health issue. We all have them. So Kevin is out, and Bill Murray is out with the 50-cent beer night at Hooters. And I have a funny feeling Dr. Kim Cloco McLean is out.
I have a funny feeling you're right.
her due date, to my recollection, is 2 days from today.
I think so.
So we will certainly, although I will say this, I would love to have a social scientist on the show, but forget that. We've got Dr. Marshall Shepard.
Hey, guys.
The president of the University of Common Sense. And hey, Brian.
Yes, sir.
You can tell Marshall is a big deal because he has many leather-bound books.
Yes.
Fake ones.
And
the Weather Channel.
And I bet you his home smells of rich mahogany. Have you ever seen the movie Anchorman, Marshall?
Actually, I've not, but I've heard about it.
You need to go see that movie. Those are lines from Anchorman.
Is that Will Ferrell?
Yeah. Okay. Will Ferrell's character is a guy named Ron Burgundy, and he'd walk around telling the ladies at parties that I'm kind of a big deal, and I have many leather-bound books, and my home smells of rich mahogany. So immediately when I see that, that's what I think of. So
I have fake vinyl books, and I'm in my basement studio, so it smells like Glade plugins.
Show title.
That is a show title. Smells like Glade plugins. That's awesome. No, look. At least you've got that. I don't even want to think about what my basement smells like.
Yeah, I've got 2 young kids, so I actually have a halfway functional basement that we use for different things. But this is my room.
No, I hear you. No, I've got a green wall deal, and I do TV in the morning from home.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and I just do like one hit. It's not. I'm not the main weather person, but they hit me one time in the morning show, and I do the same thing. I'll put something back there, but I'm in my little home closet with a green wall.
Yeah,
typically I assume that's what you've got. There's a green wall.
Yeah, it's not. No, it's not a green wall. It's just literally a vinyl screen behind me. And actually, they're coming out to replace that soon because they don't like the way it looks. Actually, so.
Well, goodness,
it's theirs. They brought it out here for me. So because
as long as you don't have to pay for what they're installing, right?
Do anything? Yeah, no, I just do this little Weather Geeks Wednesday hit on AMHQ every Wednesday. So that's really the function of it.
Okay. Well, Brian, I was going to steal it and put it back here, man. It looks better than this thing.
Why not?
So, Aubrey, how are you? Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Perfect.
Perfect. I'm hoping Nate comes on here tonight.
That would be nice.
I know he's busy, but I would love to have him on. But if he's not on, you are our closest to the ground zero here. So,
I'll put it this way: it's 9:30, and I'm just now eating dinner.
I just ate too. I'm right with you, Aubrey.
Usually,
picked up my son from football practice.
Usually, sometimes I don't even get to eat until like 11:30, and I'm like, I'll do it tomorrow.
the life of meteorologists, especially this week.
I know.
Yeah. And Rick Smith, I want to talk about the mental health thing. You've done talks on this, and I think we're paying more attention to it now. And I think about everybody that works at the Weather Service in Wilmington. I think about like Ed Petrowski, who works up there in Myrtle Beach. I don't want to start naming names here, but all the weather enterprise people, the stress that they're under this week. It's pretty extreme, and with this social media, it's hard to get away from it. It is hard to walk away from these screens. So we'll talk about that in the show.
That's one of the big issues about it is you don't clock out and go home and forget about it. I mean, you go home and turn on another computer and start looking. If you're like me, you never get away from it. So yeah, it's. And that's really my pick of the week. Actually, deals with that. So no spoilers.
Good.
But, that's
good.
You've got to take care of yourself, and it's super stressful. Whether you're in the Weather Service office, a TV station, emergency management, anybody dealing with this. I mean, this is not easy for anybody. We're all people, and we have to remember that. So yeah.
Oh, I can feel it. I've already had heart palpitations all day.
Yeah, I was telling somebody
you haven't eaten
earlier today. It's not trivial to be sitting here watching something that is going to probably kill people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's just like, we'll talk about it. I want to burn the discussion up here in the pre-show, but I clearly want to talk about that. And again, Kim Marshall, so you'll know Kim Cloco, her due date is Wednesday.
Oh, I thought she had the baby.
Oh, did she?
Yeah, I follow her on Facebook, and she's been posting pictures with her and a baby.
I think that's her baby.
That's hers, right?
I know. Okay.
I think it's hers.
All right.
A beautiful 6 pound and something little girl. So yeah, they're both doing fine.
She didn't name it Florence, did she?
I don't think so. That would have.
Can you see that? I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah. Wow. That's kind of like, let me quit talking here. There we go. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's her baby.
See, I'm not her friend on Facebook, so I don't get the good stuff. The last picture I see, she posted August 4th, is smoke and fog over the Pacific.
Yeah.
I guess that was when she was out at Apple.
Probably.
She did the talk out there in Silicon Valley. She's got some wedding pictures in here.
Yep.
But I don't see. Yeah. I think you have to be friends with her to see those. Well, goodness, we'll roll the breaking news on that. That's so we know she won't be on the show.
Yep. Everybody's healthy and doing well.
Well, I'm jealous. I'm looking at her friends. It's like an all-star cast of the Weather Enterprise. Wow.
Yeah,
I mean, everybody from Nate to Tim Marshall, Chuck Doswell, Marshall Shepard.
Prediction right now: Kim Cloco is going to be the president of AMS or NWA within the next 10 years.
There you go.
You heard it first on this show.
Absolutely.
I'm voting for
her. Would not be surprised at all.
No, I'm a big advocate. I'm pushing for it, actually.
Yep.
She is. Boy, look at Marshall's picture. Wow. This is impressive.
What picture?
Well, I'm looking at her friends on Facebook, and you're with looks like it's graduation or something here.
Yeah, I was a commencement speaker at FSU last year.
Wow.
James is creeping on everyone on Facebook.
Yeah. No, I'm turned into a Facebook creeper now. See, this is a time suck. I mean, you just see it sucks you right into it. So I'm turning this thing on.
Are you not on there other than your public page?
I rarely get on the open Facebook. It's just there's so much political rhetoric. I don't even like to look at it.
I'm mostly on Twitter these days, and I'm on Facebook for mostly personal stuff, kids, pictures of football and stuff. But I mean, I do Instagram too.
Yeah, I'm about to say Instagram is a happy little place in that there's not a lot of political hate, and it's just a happy place. And it seems like a lot of people have kind of vacated Facebook for Instagram, and I'm talking older people, like housewives and people my age, and that platform has gotten much more important, and we have to watch it, for the how we distribute weather information.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's best of both worlds for Facebook because they own it too.
Yeah, I'm about to say it is Facebook, but at least they're kind of keeping them separate.
Yep.
All right, let's. We have to wait until the bottom of the hour to roll the intro here. Now, what is Aubrey's picture? Sunflowers. That's lovely. We've lost your camera, Aubrey, and you've muted your mic. She's in an edit booth at the TV station there. And almost everybody on this show is going to be somewhat distracted with this hurricane. In fact, I got to do some podcast tomorrow night, and I'll be ultimately distracted. But anyway, we got at 30 minutes at the bottom of the hour here, in 27, 26, 25 seconds, we can hit this thing.
You think you'll still be live Thursday night?
No, we're not. That I can't be doing the corn dog eat off and the tilt-a-whirl barf when you got to
take that off my calendar.
Yes, I've taken it off mine. And for those that we are in a season where I typically let's explain. Yeah, I'm typically doing live shots on Thursday night from county fairs, and Brian often backs me up in the studio here, so that we're talking about that. And hello, friends on television. Welcome. It's 30 after the hour. This is WeatherBrains, and we are gathered together. We are here. We are on time. So let's roll this sucker. We're going to roll channel 1 and channel 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, this is WeatherBrains, episode number 660 for September 10th, 2018. And tropical geeks probably know this is the climatological peak of the Atlantic hurricane season. And guess what? We're probably going to talk about mostly tonight. But before we even get into that, let me mention that a couple of folks are out. We've got Kevin Selly. His dad's having a few little health issues, and we encourage you to say a prayer for him. I think he's going to be okay, but Kevin is tending to his dad, and he's in the Carolinas of all things. He's kind of going into the path of Florence with this, so he's got to deal with his dad, and he's got to deal with a hurricane. So, but Kevin is out tonight. Bill Murray, whenever he's not here, it's typically 50-cent beer night at Hooters, so he should be back next week. And let me just right off the bat.
We interrupt this program for a CBS Radio Net Alert Bulletin.
So Kim Cloco McLean delivered her baby. So Aubrey, do you know the date? So when this happened, by any chance?
I don't actually. I am a little clueless. I guess I'm not Facebook friends with her either. But
Marshall Shepard knows everything. Marshall, when did this happen? You know everything.
I'm Facebook friends, so I just saw a picture. I think it was probably about a week ago. So from what I can tell, everybody's doing well and healthy. So
hold on, I am Facebook friends with her. I'm checking for the date. Stand by.
Yeah, Rick, you're out there. You're like neighbors. You ought to know this. What's the deal here?
Just down the road from me. September 6th was the birth date.
Thursday.
Yeah.
4 days ago then.
Yeah.
Okay. So I assume everybody's healthy and happy. We have
believe so.
The proper number of fingers and toes. So that's awesome. So again, Kim, her date was September 12th. I can remember that because Brian Peters, that is the anniversary of which hurricane? Now think about it. The Alabama Gulf Coast, late 70s.
Frederick.
September 12th. Yes. Hurricane Frederick came up September 12th, 1979, the late night of the 12th, early morning of the 13th. That's how I associate that. But anyway, we're happy for Kim, and she's going to be out on maternity leave for a while. But we got a great, I feel a good show here because we're just going to do pure weather. And for those that don't know, Dr. Marshall Shepard was the president of the American Meteorological Society in 2013. As I often say, he is the president of the University of Common Sense in the weather world. He heads up the atmospheric science program at the University of Georgia. How about those Georgia Bulldogs, Marshall?
Go Dogs. Gotta give them some love. It's going to come down to us probably in Bama again.
So you guys beat South Carolina. That was in Columbia, right?
Yeah, it was in Columbia, and man, if you watched some of the networks, you would have thought that South Carolina was like a top 2 team or something. We spanked them.
Yeah, it was I think it is. It's going to wind up being the same 2 teams, probably the same type situation this year. I do weather support at the University of Alabama, and I was down there for that game. And I'm very fortunate to work in a cool place where it's, refreshing and air conditioned and all that. But the heat was pretty tough. This was a daytime game Saturday, and Alabama played Virginia Culinary Institute Tech or something. And, it was like 50-0 at the half. And when the third quarter started, everybody in the sun, they just left on that east side of the stadium. There was like nobody over there. The people on the west side, they stayed because they were in the shade. But it was your typical early September Tuscaloosa game. But it was just hot and muggy. And that's it for Football Brains. Rick Smith, how'd the University of Oklahoma do?
We are also spanking our first 2 opponents. We beat Florida Atlantic University the first week, and then this past weekend we played UCLA here and beat them. I went to the first game, and talking about heat, it was probably the hottest game I've ever been to. We were in full sun the whole time. I think they sold, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of water bottles the university sold. It was brutal. But this past Saturday, the game, it was cloudy and in the 70s. So we're football season's off to a good start.
Awesome. I love this time of the year. It's just awesome here. A little music for Rick and Kim here. And you got a great song. This is a great song.
The opposing team, we hear it 122 times a game.
Yeah, and there's some more sort of relevant news. Rick, isn't your son playing some of that now? Isn't he in the OU band?
Yeah, my son is in the OU band this year for the first year. So I'm pretty excited about that. So, yeah.
That's awesome. What instrument, Rick?
He plays percussion, so all kinds of things.
He'll be a chick magnet. The babes love the drum guys. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Any day, I'm waiting for it. So.
Yeah. So and Nate Johnson, we certainly can understand his situation. Nate is the closest to the landfall point of Hurricane Florence, and obviously in North Carolina, and he oversees. Well, I don't know what the right word is, but he coordinates the weather operation of the NBC-owned stations, and he's slightly busy tonight, so we kind of figured he would not be here. But Aubrey, you're the closest we have to the zone here. So how was it today on day 1 of the longest week of your career?
Yeah, definitely a busy day. Came in early to get everything set up, and of course, I'm flying solo tonight and tomorrow night, so that is amazing. But so we're getting ready. We haven't had a major impact since 2003 in Isabel. So trying to remind people that, yes, it does happen here, even in the Virginia mountains. If you've moved here after 1996 or 2003 and you don't remember, or you weren't here then, kind of setting that range of possibilities, what we actually can get, what's happened before, and what we expect at this point. So this is going to be, unfortunately, potentially a catastrophic event, considering we picked up anywhere from 2 to 6 inches of rain between Friday and today. And on top of that, we're at a 16-inch surplus for the year already. We've had a lot of rain.
Wow.
Hey, James, can I say something about that real quick? What Aubrey just said?
Go.
I tweeted something this weekend warning people that with all the rain from this and the difference about Harvey versus North Carolina, is we've got terrain and we've got elevation, so we could see significant flooding, even landslides. And some guy on Twitter accused me of being a fearmonger. I mean,
Rick, was that you?
No comment.
I couldn't believe. No, he had a Bama fan tag on. I'm just gonna put it out there, but I mean, he got lit up by a lot of my followers, though. I just put it out there and let it go. But he didn't seem to understand this notion that a lot of rainfall and elevated terrain is a significant threat.
Absolutely,
So, Marsha,
considering I'm sorry, but
Go ahead,
considering how much rain that some of these areas have, I mean, North Carolina already dealt with a lot of landslides already earlier in the season, and all the flooding in Pennsylvania and stuff. But Virginia, I mean, Virginia, North Carolina, we've seen a lot of rain over the last couple of months. This is the setup leading to these events has so much to do with the potential impacts. I mean, you can't ignore what's happened over the last couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Marshall, how do you think the Weather Enterprise has done so far? In my opinion, they have performed in an exemplary fashion. Everybody involved. Don't you think so?
No, I agree, James. I think a couple of things have jumped out for me is that the models have done pretty well in the Hurricane Center. I want to give them a shout out and props right now. I saw Eric Blake from the National Hurricane Center mention earlier on Twitter to send coffee and pizza. It's going to be a long week, so we want to thank them. But yeah, the Enterprise has done well. I think the messaging has been sound. I will say this, though, and I'm interested in all of your thoughts on this. I was a little worried about warning fatigue for a while because the models have been so good with this thing, we've been talking about it for a while. And so I just was worried that there'd be a little bit of fatigue with this as we get a little closer to the event. But overall, I think there's been a good sort of enterprise handling of it. Of course, you got all the social media ridiculousness out there that you're going to get. But for the most part, other than the social meteorologists, we have a fairly sort of consistent message. It's been interesting to sort of watch the interplay with the sort of differences between the GFS and the European model. The GFS has been a little loopy, and I literally, pun intended, in terms of some of its recent runs. But overall, I think it's been a good job. We'll see see if I can say that 3 days from now.
Yeah, Dr. Shepard, this is Brian Peters. I just wanted to say that I remember one of the things that happened in Hurricane Elena when it came into the Gulf and then turned towards Florida was basically storm fatigue because it sat off Clearwater there for nearly 3 days. And a lot of emergency management folks, they're set up for the storm to come in and go by, but not set up for even that length of time. 3 days. And I'm sure it extended longer than that. So that's one of the things that worries me. I know on our blog this weekend, I said, it worries me that the GFS is stalling or making this thing real slow or loopy. I like your loopy. That's great. And that's scary because I don't think we as emergency management and even the weather community, I don't know that we're prepared to deal with something that might last, say, this weekend, it was looking like maybe 3 or 4 days. And it's like, wow, you don't want a major hurricane pummeling you for 3 or 4 days.
Well, we have the good news, if you can find some good news in the tragic Hurricane Harvey, is that people should remember what Harvey did.
Yes.
It's essentially the same thing. But I think, and again, I'm interested in your thoughts on this. I said that this would be a 1-2 punch for Harvey. I think this possibly could be a 1-2 punch with Florence as well. But I find that people, they get the concept of Category 4 hurricane making landfall. The way we cover and talk about that, they get it. Wind, storm surge, possible tornadoes on the right side of the storm. But I think people often struggle with that phase 2, which is, days of additional rainfall because it doesn't just zip out. So I think it resonates exactly with what you just said, which
right.
is, we have this mental model or this mental framework of what's supposed to happen to a Category 4, and nature doesn't know the rules.
It doesn't happen when that storm is on shore. Automatically, it's going to be, quote, downgraded to a tropical storm or a depression. And that term downgraded is something we debated a lot on Twitter last year with Harvey and other storms. Is that the right term to use? I know technically it is, but that implies to a lot of people, it's the worst is over. It's not as bad. And when in fact, like with Harvey and maybe with this too, the worst may be just beginning.
Yeah, Rick, I think everybody's, and rightfully so, we're meteorologists, so we kind of, dig this stuff a little bit in terms of the facts about the storm. We do not dig or cheer for the storm because they kill people. I never root for the storm. But one of the things that you're seeing a lot of talk about is if this comes in as a Cat 5, and all model indications that I'm seeing suggest that it could certainly strengthen some more. It would be, I think we could check this, but I think it would be the first time we've had a Cat 5 make landfall in North Carolina. I think that's a true statement.
That'd be the first time.
Yeah, it would be the first time. Thank you, Jane. So I think that's in itself news, but I remind people all the time that a lot of that rain from Harvey fell when it wasn't even a hurricane. So we've got to focus, and I know Rick's big on this, on the impacts. It's not a point on the map. This thing's going to have broad aerial coverage. There's already been a lot of rain in that region and in mid-Atlantic, so you're dumping a lot of rain on saturated soil. So as bad as a Cat 4 or 5 hurricane making landfall is, the secondary punch with the rainfall could be equally as bad.
I think as a weather enterprise, we're starting to communicate the impact a little better. There's always room for improvement. We still have to learn from the social scientists, but I even think within NOAA, Marshall, it seems like the products coming from the Hurricane Center and the local weather service offices are starting to address that. Don't get hung up if this is going to be a Category 4, a Category 5, or whatever. And people are still latching onto that. I'll tell you, they look for that. In all these DMs and these things, we watch people asking for personal forecast here. They want to know what categories are going to be, but I think we have to move past that and just talk about the impact. And I think it just seems like some of the social science is starting to blend in with the weather products, as I see. And I really like how they do the key messages from the Hurricane Center. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you guys pay attention to those, but they're easy to understand. It's not a long read. It's an easy read, and it makes sense, and it's not hyped up, yet it's pretty firm. So I wonder, Rick, if we ought to be doing key messages for tornado events down here in Tornado Alley.
Thought about that early over the weekend. I think that's one of the most effective things the Hurricane Center's done recently. I mean, it's just with social media, especially, you're looking for something to share. Well, if you share that one graphic, you've got the key points that you need to take away from it. You've got a good track map there. Really, it's a one-stop. I mean, that's all you need for social media. Really, if everybody just shared that, we'd all be in pretty good shape. So whoever came up with that idea, I love it. And like you said, the language is simple, but it's direct, and you can read into the language the urgency or the level of concern that the forecaster has. So I love it. And yeah, maybe we do. Maybe we need to do that with winter storms or tornado outbreaks or whatever.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of follow up on something James said also, because I agree on this overemphasis on category, because as useful in some ways as the Saffir-Simpson scale is, Cat 3, Cat 4, it has some problems, though, because it doesn't convey what I think is one of the biggest threats from Florence, one of the biggest threats we saw in Harvey, the rainfall threat. The Saffir-Simpson scale has no inherent information on the rainfall and inland freshwater flooding threat. And so in recent storms that we've seen, I think that's been a critical hazard for the public, but yet it doesn't even have to be a hurricane to be a significant flood producer. And so I've been grappling in my head in my research group, University of Georgia, how do we integrate the rainfall threat in a consumable way that the public gets? Because I think there's still the struggle with the fact that people say, I'm familiar with rain, I've seen floods. And I just don't think that they have the same gut reaction to the rain threat, even with a hurricane.
Yeah, so this boils down to the question, and again, this is more of a social science. It is a social science question, not a physical science question. Do we need to rethink the entire Saffir-Simpson scale at some point? Dr. Shepard, what say you?
I'm on the record saying that. I've tweeted that. I think we really do need a more integrated way of thinking about hurricane threats. Now, there's a colleague. There's a professor at the University of Alabama. I don't know if you've met him, James, or anybody else. His name is Jason Sinkbile, and he actually published a paper a few years ago on a new classification system that tries to capture all of the impacts, particularly of a hurricane as it moves inland. So I think he was onto something with that. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some research, and it may not be perfect. But I think, honestly, this is perhaps a little controversial. I think the Saffir-Simpson scale is useful, but I think it's overemphasized, and it frankly may be a relic of the past that we need to think about some other ways of doing it.
Yeah, and on this science, they're cranky old me and they don't like change. I love change because I think we have to change. And if we don't, we won't be effective. So I would totally agree in that we might need to look at something like that. You don't do it overnight. You don't do it in 6 months. You take time. You do the social studies. But, you put somebody like, Kim of our show here, Kim Cloco McLean on it, and some other social scientists, and then some folks, the Hurricane Center, maybe emergency managers, the IWT type thing, academia and engineers and hydrologists, and you come up with something better. And I think there's something out there. So
yeah, we changed the original Fujita scale. We changed it to the enhanced Fujita scale, and I know there's some activity going on with Tim Marshall and some people at the AMS and the American Society of Civil Engineers trying to improve that even more.
Yeah. And by the way, Marshall, can you pull your mic away from your chin? Brian's got a good point. He's rubbing up against your chin.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. Better.
Yeah. Get a little bit of scratchiness there, sir.
Yep.
Perfect.
Got
Perfect. But yeah, I just think there's something better out there. But in the meantime, these key messages, if you read what it says, life-threatening freshwater flooding is likely from a prolonged and exceptionally heavy rainfall event, which may extend inland over the Carolinas and the mid-Atlantic for hundreds of miles, as Florence is expected to slow down as it approaches the coast and moves inland. How easy to understand is that? I love the way they do this. And there's only, let's just say, in a way, it's good. It's kind of like Twitter. It's not going to be long. It's not going to take a long time to read this. But, somebody asked me all these questions. I just say, go read this. This is pretty much what we know right now. So the next question, Marshall, you've been following the evacuation situation today, and you've been through many of these in your life. How do you think that's going? It seems like most of the mandatory evacuations begin tomorrow. Do you think that's too late, too early? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable. It was interesting. I was talking to a colleague in North Carolina today, and she was saying that local jurisdictions in North Carolina have a good bit of say on when people evacuate, but the governor can also issue an evacuation warning. But she said there's really no teeth in either of them, and so I don't know enough about North Carolina evacuation policy, but it seemed a little confusing to me. If you've got jurisdictional control at the local level, perhaps it makes sense, but I for the most part, I've seen that there's mandatory evacuations in South Carolina. I think that caught some people off guard today. Makes sense to me, but I think a lot of people were asking, well, why is South Carolina calling for mandatory evacuations when it looks like, at least right now, landfall will be either sort of around the border or slightly north of the South Carolina-North Carolina border, and of course the worst will be on the right side. But what I was reminding people about is that, yeah, they're not necessarily going to be on the worst side of the eye, but they're going to still be in the midst of a fairly large storm. So I could certainly understand the precautionary measures that they're taking there. I will say this, though. I have a friend of mine who's just child goes to a university there in the coastal North Carolina area. And as of this afternoon, they hadn't made any calls. Some of the universities had, but her particular school had not made any calls on classes for later in the week. And I'm just like, what are we waiting for? We have enough information at this point to make some decisions. And I think for the most part, I think people are making decisions, but I have had people out there tweeting me saying, I've got a cousin or I got an uncle that they're not leaving. And you're going to always have that. Someone asked me today, how can I get my relative to leave? They're saying they're not leaving. They're going to take a wait and see attitude. I don't know how. I didn't have an answer for them, because it's just like people that sit in a metal stadium during a football game when there are cloud to ground lightning strikes all around. I mean, I think we've warned about that until we've turned blue, but people still do it. And so I'm almost to the point where I say, look, people are adults. We can only lead the horse to water. We can't make it drink. And so I get frustrated with that, but I know it's a reality that there are some people that just aren't going to leave. They said, I lived through hurricane, blah, 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 when I was 5. I'm not going anywhere. But one of the things that I'll often say is it's hard for people to internalize, or it's hard for people to prepare for something that they haven't experienced. So even though you've experienced a hurricane before, you might not have experienced one like Hurricane Florence.
Yeah, and I think on the South Carolina, I've heard a lot of people griping about the South Carolina evacuation. People see that line, and we tell them don't focus on the line, but we all know they focus on the line. They see it coming into Wilmington, and they all say, well, South Carolina's on that good offshore flow side. They don't need to be doing that. Well, here's the problem. What if all of a sudden the model shifts south and the forecast has to go south, and you're within 24 hours? How long does it take to do an evacuation? This is not a 24, 36 hours. I think that is the course of least regret. Don't you agree, Marshall, that they're doing the right thing to evacuate South Carolina?
James, you will never get an argument from me on that point, because I am of the mindset that it's okay to prepare. And if nothing happens, then just count your blessings. That's my philosophy. I mean, I don't get this whole, well, dang it, I had to, and people will say, well, you didn't have to take off of work, Dr. Shepard, or you didn't have to do this. But I've been in these types of situations before. I am going to do what's best for me and my family, even if it's a slight inconvenience for me. So if I think that there's a life-threatening danger, and with Hurricane Florence, there certainly is, I'm willing to be inconvenienced to save my life.
Yeah.
And let me chase one rabbit real quick. We're going to chase a rabbit and go right back to tropical. So I've been, kind of people have hit me up on the Twitter today about this guy named Clay Travis. Do you guys know who this, and let me see who he is.
No.
He is a Fox Sports radio talk show guy, but he was griping about apparently the pro game where there were all these lightning delays. And I want to say it was Tennessee at Miami. And I don't know if anybody on the show is familiar with that, but apparently they stopped the game multiple times. But here's his tweet. I don't know the answer to this, but how many fans or players have been killed by lightning at college or pro games? Has it ever happened? These lightning delays used to not exist. I'm wondering when they became so common and what prompted them. I do know that fans regularly fall out of the upper deck seats and die. Only 40 people a year die from lightning in this country. Seems like evacuating stadiums may be more dangerous than the lightning itself. How would you respond to this guy, Marshall?
I'd say, a lot of things didn't exist before we figured them out or had technology to do them. We've got lightning detection systems now. And so we know that there's lightning within 8 miles or however many miles, whichever the threshold. By the way, my rechargeable lighting, front lighting, just died on me. So if I got a little bit darker there, that's what's going on. But I would say that, look, there are a lot of things that we didn't have before. We walked uphill both ways to school when we were 40. I mean, that kind of logic just drives me crazy. So what we really need to understand is that we take precautions. I've got to buy car insurance, even though I didn't have a car accident today, but it's there to, for my protection. And I think that's, what these universities are doing. Look, they have a lot of students and they've taken a responsibility for a lot of students and a lot of people's, dear possession, their children. There are a lot of liability issues here if someone gets struck by lightning. So I certainly understand it. Yeah, are the numbers there to support this notion that you got 30 people dying a year from lightning strikes in stadiums? Probably not. But look, there are 45 people that have kids that have, I don't know the exact number, but 38, 40 number of kids that have died in hot cars this summer. As well. That's not a huge number, but it's one more child than I'm willing to see die. So I don't have a problem with these extra precautionary measures. I will say this. Charlie Woodrum and a lot of colleagues at National Weather Service and the AMS, there is an effort right now going on to fine-tune these lightning policies a little bit. And I thought that they were nearing completion on their work. So I think you're going to see something coming forth in the next few months that sort of is a fine-tuning, because one of the big problems that I have heard with this policy is that if there's a lightning strike within 8 miles or whatever the mile, they have to wait 30 minutes. But there's been an effort to say, look, we've got a little bit better detection capabilities now. Maybe that we don't need the 30-minute when we have this detection capability. So watch for that forthcoming in the next few months.
And I do think if you do a study, not just necessarily of American football, but of international soccer, there's been a series of deaths over the course of the years here. So, I don't. We're right in the middle of this hurricane. We don't have time to get in there and research that. But I want to get back with this guy and give him some good facts on deaths. And if you look at those that have died just this year alone, it's tragic. These are real people at a real place at a real time. And lightning often just kills people one at a time, and it doesn't get the headlines like hurricanes and tornadoes. But one of these days, it is going to strike a football stadium, or it's going to strike some big venue outside. And we'll get Kevin Closel on here. He knows everything about that. But anyway, I just want to chase that rabbit for just a second.
Before you leave that rabbit, James, did you notice that the latest lightning statistics, there were a couple more deaths recently, but also that fishing, used to think golfers were susceptible, but that fishing is one of the most hazardous occupations as far as lightning fatalities.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we had a 12-year-old girl killed down here on our Gulf Coast a couple of years ago from Arkansas, and we had a young man killed last year.
Yep.
And nobody brings this stuff up, but and I'm a weather guy, but I am afraid of weather. I'm afraid of one thing when it comes to weather, and that's it. I'm not afraid of hurricanes, not afraid of tornadoes, not afraid of floods. We have reasonable warning. We know they're coming. Every thunderstorm we have in the afternoon has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ground strokes, and they're just terrifying to me. But again, we'll chase that back here in just a little bit. But I want to go, let's quickly, let's just talk about what we think is going to happen. So, Marshall, we'll let you be our tropical desk expert this evening. How about that? You're our John Hope of the evening on this show. Give us your best guess on landfall, the intensity, timing. What happens? Yeah. Will it move inland? Will it loop around the Outer Banks? What do you think? And again, we refer everybody to the official National Hurricane Center track here, but we're just throwing in some commentary. So, Marshall, let's start with you, and we're going to go around the horn.
Yeah, I think we're talking about Cat 4 or 5 storm at landfall, probably late Thursday evening into early Friday morning. I do think that there will be somewhat of a stall. I'm going to take a happy medium between the GFS and European, but certainly put a little bit more heft in this European, which actually had it sort of lingering around a bit as well. So I do think that we'll have the record wind and storm surge in North Carolina, and I think we will see a significant flooding disaster.
Do you strike the east coast of the United States?
I'm sorry, James. There was a little bit of sort of hang up there, so I couldn't hear the question.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think this will be the strongest East Coast hurricane on record for the United States?
At this particular latitude, yes. I think it certainly will have that be in contention for that. But this is one of the things I will say. This is already a strange storm. It's really the first time we've seen a storm this large. I mean, this intense, I would say, at this particular latitude. If you kind of go back and pull the HURRDAT or IB-Trax hurricane databases, if you look at the ensemble of major hurricanes that have affected this part of the basin, you haven't really seen anything at this latitude.
Yeah, this I totally agree. Typically, they do something else. They don't come over here. So we're in kind of the weird zone here. All right, Rick Smith, what say you? You're watching from afar, from the Great Plains of the United States. You don't have to worry about being right or wrong. Just put your brain power into it.
Well, that's a good position to be in, but I really can't disagree with anything Marshall said. I mean, I think that's kind of would be my assessment of the forecast too. I haven't looked at it in great detail, and I'm not tracking it inch by inch like a lot of people are. But I do think I'm very concerned about what's going to happen the second wave of this, whatever it is, with the heavy rainfall. What role will the orography and the terrain play in this? You know, we got all this. Now, these are two different storms. I can't compare this with Harvey directly. But look what happened with Harvey in the flat coastal plain of Texas, and now we're going to have potentially Florence moving into the Appalachian Mountains and all the terrain there, and who knows what's going to happen with that. So I think there's some unknowns once we get in. I think the impacts will be significant. And one thing you were talking about the evacuations earlier, I hardly endorse that, because one thing we have to remember is South Carolina is still well within the margin of error for the track. You know, the further out you go, the bigger the error in that little line that we're not supposed to follow is. So it's very reasonable to assume that track could shift left or right either way. So I don't see how you can make any other decision than what they did.
By the way, before we go to Brian, I will say I'm noticing on the recon data coming back, the pressure has leveled off. It's actually gone up a smidgen, whether it's an eye wall replacement cycle or if there's some shear influencing the storm. I don't know right now, but I found that interesting. So at least the rapid intensification phase is leveled off for now. But looking at the synoptic pattern, I don't see much of a reason for this thing to weaken between now and the time it gets to the Gulf Coast. All right, or the Atlantic coast. Let me
Get your coast right, James. Get your
all right,
coast
Brian.
right.
Brian, you're a long veteran here. You're the senior of the group. What say you?
Thank you. I really, I think Dr. Shepard has pegged it pretty well. I guess one of the things I fear is what I see the GFS doing, and I kind of hope the GFS is wrong. I mean, I pull from my model. It's our U.S. model, but I hope that it doesn't do any loop-de-loops or stalls in a position right there, because it'll be over reasonably warm water, and if the center stays just offshore. That just scares the living daylights out of me, thinking about a storm of a possible category 4 or possibly a 5 approaching the coast and then remaining a 3 or 4 and staying there for 3 or 4 days. That just scares me. And then, of course, I think Rick has got it too. The second wave is the flooding, and we can't compare this to anything else because it's not the same as the terrain that Harvey experienced or any of the storms along the Gulf Coast. So I think there's it's going to be interesting to watch, but it's also going to be heart-rendering to watch from a distance, knowing what's happening, as Marshall Shepard said a few minutes ago.
Hey, James, I just put on my former NASA scientist hat because I was deputy project scientist for a GPM mission, and I just pulled up some microwave satellite data, which allows us to peer inside the storm like a radar, but from space. And indeed, you're spot on, James. It looks like it's going through an eyewall replacement cycle right now, based on what I see in the microwave imagery. It's a passive microwave. For those, I'm sure most WeatherBrains listeners know all about it, but I'm looking at some 91 gigahertz brightness temperatures, and yeah, there's definitely evidence of an eyewall replacement cycle, which would explain that little slight jog down in intensity. But that I don't be fooled by that. As we all know that with an eyewall replacement cycle, that could certainly be temporary.
Yeah, absolutely. And and again, most people listen to this show, but I wanted to just kind of quickly, for those that might be watching, throw up an animation of the GFS. And this is look, this is people that watch this show, we think understand the situation here. This is not a forecast. This is just deterministic model output. I don't share this on social media, but what this thing does, it just loopy. That's your word, Marshall. I mean, and look at that. It's got the pressure of 908 millibars just lurking off the coast. This is horrifying. I mean, I don't think people understand how bad this is if this scenario panned out. And you talk about weeping and gnashing of teeth. Goodness gracious. I could not, this is just horrifying stuff if this were to verify. And it's on the table. I mean, we're not saying this is going to happen, but, something like that's not out of the question because the steering currents collapse out there.
Yep. Yeah, I've seen some discussion out there in some of the discussion boards I'm on and various other places about GFS having some poor ocean coupling and some other microphysical related processes that perhaps aren't being resolved. But look, for all the GFS Euro pick your favorite team and dress up like a model and put on the jersey for the Euro or the GFS. Look, the GFS, certainly the European is the better model on average, but the GFS is not some sort of, little computer program running on BASIC or COBOL in a basement somewhere. It's still a fairly world-class model. And so, we have to at least keep it on the table. I mean, what if that scenario does play out? I mean, it's perhaps not likely, but I think it's there. And frankly, I haven't completely dismissed it because it's been there and the GFS runs consistently for several runs.
Good point. That consistency has been there since this past weekend.
And again, this is output from the European model that we're showing here, and this is probably extremely illegal to do this, but it's just we're just having fun here with some friends. And I don't know. Tell you what, let me hang on a second here. Let me stop this and just kind of go through it manually. The European brings it up very close to the Hurricane Center track around Cape Fear and Wilmington, and then it just hangs around here and does the loop-de-loop thing. It drifts north, and tremendous amounts of rain with this thing. It's just none of these solutions you see you like. But again, if you're new to this, and if you're not a long-time listener, maybe you're listening for the first time or watching for the first time, just use the output from the National Hurricane Center. I did see one interesting little note, and I'm not going to say where it came from, but there was some concern that the local Eastern Region Weather Service offices were not as aggressive as they maybe could have been over the weekend. And again, we don't like to criticize anybody here, and a lot of the directives kind of come from up top, but it seemed like today everybody's on it, and they're pretty aggressive. All the offices up and down the East Coast. Rick, is there a big culture difference in the National Weather Service regions? And I'm not saying good or bad, but is there a culture difference?
There is. I mean, there's a regional cultural difference.
Brian can talk. Rick can't. I'll ask Brian here just a minute.
I'll get it started, and Brian can finish it. But,
no, that's all right.
And I'm not saying anything bad. Every region is different. The management of the region, the leadership, and Weather Service is divided into 6 regions, and each of those regions has a regional director and a whole leadership staff. And then they kind of manage the activities of their offices within that region. So Eastern Region does things a little bit differently than Southern Region, than Central Region. Everyone's a little bit different, but I haven't really been paying close attention to what the local offices have been doing. But I know that there's a concerted effort all the way from the national level of the Weather Service down to the regional level, down to local office level, to just hit that message hard and get it out there and have a consistent message. One of the most important things is to have consistency with the Hurricane Center and to get that message out there and be sure that all these decision makers are hearing the same thing, no matter who they're talking to.
Let's talk about the strain and the stress for people that are in the weather enterprise, the mental health issues that maybe people are facing. I don't think people understand the stress, Rick, that folks are under here. And you know, that we talked about this before. It used to be different 10, 20, 30 years ago, where, for example, I worried about being on television. That was it. Now, the minute you're off television, you're on the Twitter and the Facebag and the Instagram and the Snapchat, and you got all these emails. It never, ever, ever, ever stops. You can't get off the grid. The minute you get off the grid for a nap, you come back, you got to play catch up. Rick, how does this affect people that work events like this? You work some big time events in your career.
Well, it affects everybody differently. Not everybody responds the same way. Some people are able to handle it better. Some people are predisposed to just not get as stressed as other people. People have different coping mechanisms. But one thing that's for sure is this does affect us as people. We're all people. You can't get beyond that. We can be geeky, introverted scientists looking at the latest model runs and all that stuff, but we're still people. We still live in these communities that we're forecasting for the most part. And how can it not be stressful? And you may not know it's stressful. You may not feel it, but this is, we talk about cumulative stress. You may not be working a major Hurricane Harvey level event, but every one of these little events adds up and it piles up. And if you think of a glass of water, slowly pouring water into a glass, or your glass can only hold so much, and how much your glass can hold varies by person. The thing to remember is that it does affect us as people. One thing I've been through some events here, but one thing I cannot imagine doing that a lot of these coastal weather service offices and maybe other Mets are doing too, is having to pack your family up in a car and say, okay, I am the WCM at the Wilmington, North Carolina WFO. Honey and the kids, take the dog, get in the car and drive 200 miles east. I got to stay here. I don't know when I'll talk to you again. I can't imagine that. That, to me, going through tornadoes and stuff we do here, I've never had to do anything like that. And people are doing that right now. People are probably doing that or have done it in some of these coastal offices. So it takes a toll. I mean, we are forecasting very bad things. And if our forecasts are right, if we do a good job, that means very, very bad things are going to happen to people. So do you want to be right? Do you want to be wrong? I mean, there's a whole lot of push and pull and tugging going on in the emotional side of meteorology during these types of events. And I've never worked in a coastal office. I've never been in a hurricane or had to deal with that from directly as a weather service employee. But there's a lot of things going on, and it's not just weather service. It's TV meteorologists. It's meteorologists at state EOCs, and anybody that's dealing with this is private sector. This is real stuff that can impact how you work and the quality of your work.
Yeah, Rick, do you have it? Go ahead, Marshall. Go.
Yeah, I just want to quickly follow up on that. I was telling someone just today, James. I said someone was like, well, do you get excited about this? This is a volleyball game. I was at my daughter's volleyball. Do you get excited about this? You're a meteorologist. You got into this because of storms like this, right? I said, yeah, in a younger time frame, I mean, I was just geeked when something like this happened. And yeah, it's still scientifically interesting. But I said, we possess information, as Rick just said, that we know is going to lead to very horrific things for people's lives. A storm of this magnitude, even with the best warnings, even with the best information, is probably going to have some dire consequences for society. So that's the tough burden to bear. I woke up this morning, I looked at my wife and I said, I haven't felt like this since I felt when Maria came about. I said, I have this pit in my stomach that I don't feel often. And so, we rightfully and graciously thank our emergency managers, our first responders, all the people that are going to be on the front line when this thing finally hits. But I often remind people to make sure you send a shout out to your local meteorologist, the James Spans of the world, to your National Weather Service meteorologist like Rick Smith, to the private forecasters out there that are working hard. This is a service to the nation as well. And so I think it's important that we remember that this is not just fun and games. And that's why I'll admit it, I cringe sometimes when I detect a little excitement in our colleagues or in weather enthusiasts, or, oh, it's favorable, or it's looking at, I don't find these things favorable. I don't even like there's a website I like to go to that shows the shear profiles and it shows that if it's favorable for the hurricane to develop, psychologically, I don't even like the use of that word. I just prefer something like, oh, it's more conducive for development of the storm. I just think favorable has a positive connotation when we want these things to weaken.
Rick, do you have any practical points? I would imagine there might be somebody listening now, and maybe it's after the event. They're listening to this after Florence is in. What practical points or advice can you give somebody that maybe is going through this for the first time, where they've got this grueling, brutal, week-long schedule with little sleep and intense pressure? Is there any practical advice that you've got for them?
Well, as hard as it is, it's easy to say, take care of yourself, get rest, get exercise, eat good. But we know that's not going to happen. You're not going to sleep well. You're going to eat whatever junk you have available in the office. Maybe sleeping on the floor in your boss's office and not getting good rest anyway. And even after the event's over, you're not going to be able to turn all that off. So I think one of the most important things is just to know that it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to have these feelings after the event. There's nothing wrong with you. It's okay to feel depressed, upset, unable to watch videos. There's videos I still haven't watched from 2013. I just can't watch them. I mean, that's all normal, and that's okay. And then I think it's important too to somehow, and this is hard for geeky, introverted scientists to do, to have the Oprah moment and sit down and talk about your feelings, but talk it out. Talk to somebody. You can do it in a professional way. And one of the most beneficial things that happen in our office and other offices after events is when we have counselors come in. They're not curing us or solving anything, but what they're doing is facilitating a discussion. So now we can talk about these things more openly in my office and other offices. So, it really comes down to taking care of yourself the best you can. You can't help people if you are exhausted or if you are mentally stressed to the point where you really can't function. You're not eating well, sleeping well, you're having health issues. So you got to take care of yourself, and then we got to take care of each other. And, like Marshall said, give support to these offices, give a shout out. I love when I see Weather Service offices giving a shout out to their neighbors on the East Coast who are enduring this. And, we're all one big team here, whether you work for AccuWeather, the Weather Channel, a local TV station, the National Weather Service, whatever you're doing. we got to stick together and take care of ourselves the best we can.
And take them some pizza. I mean, I would even go as far as going beyond the shout outs. I mean, these local offices and people out there that are on the, like we just said, they're not going to be eating well and doing those types of things. I mean, let's support these colleagues in that way as a public as well, because they're put in some cases, and I'll say this, in some cases they're putting their lives on the line to save others. I think about Hurricane Irma last year. I had colleagues, good friends, classmates of mine from Florida State that were hunkered down there in Key West National Weather Service office as Irma was headed right towards them. And they didn't flinch at all. They stayed there and did their job. I mean, those are servants to society. They're true patriots, and I give them a shout out every chance I get.
So let's talk about the JOQ public. That we're talking about us. Well, let's talk about people. I just noted, Marshall, you tweeted out, hey, if you're listening, give me a shout out. And all these people came back. I just saw somebody listening from Wilmington, North Carolina tonight. This is their first hurricane. So let's talk about the public. You know, whether people are under stress. You talked about stress. Now, let's say that you're in Wilmington, North Carolina. This is your first hurricane. What advice, Marshall, would you give somebody that's living there? Maybe they're new to the area. They're new to hurricanes. What's your advice for them? What would you say?
A couple of things. One, make sure you understand and know your evacuation procedures where you live. I'm certain that the North Carolina Emergency Management Organization has some type of app or website that tells you exactly what you need to know about evacuating from a hurricane. So if you're listening in Wilmington right now and you haven't been through, Google and find that immediately. Whether it's here in Georgia, we have the Ready Georgia app that's put out by our GMA. But also, if there are evacuations in that region, get out. I mean, leave, particularly in that coastal community. That was something that I said today on a TV media appearance that I did. But if you're a bit further inland and you think you are going to stay, this is the time to stock up on food, batteries, have ways to charge your cell phones, etc. Have a first aid and emergency kits. Also, here are a couple things. I published an article in Forbes today on the ways that people died in Hurricane Sandy up around New Jersey and New York. The obvious and most deadly way was drowning. It was about 40%. But here are some of the other ways that people died in Hurricane Sandy. Carbon monoxide poisoning, because when you had lost power, they were heating their homes or doing other types of cooking with sources that led to carbon monoxide. People died from falling trees. So make sure, because again, the ground's very saturated in these regions. There's going to be a lot of rain. Check for trees and other things around you that could fall because of the saturation and the winds. I saw something that Ryan Maui put out there. There's a slug of hurricane force winds that's going to move further inland. It's not going to just be near the coast if the European model is correct. People died from falls, from heart attacks. So just be aware of these other ways that can cause stress for you as well. But first and foremost, find out your local emergency management and evacuation procedures.
I think another thing too, and Marshall, you touched on it, is you can't fight the storm. You can't do anything to stop the storm, but what you can do is empower yourself to deal with the storm. So you can empower yourself with information, find good, reliable information sources. If you're stressed out or nervous or have anxiety about the storm, for goodness sakes, don't go surfing through Twitter and reading everything on Twitter and everything on Facebook. Find your favorite trusted meteorologist and stick with that. Don't go surfing around. You're just asking for trouble if you do that. And then empower yourself by being ready. Like Marshall said, plan for it. We talk about having kits and things like that all the time, but really every little minute you spend on preparation in the days before a storm like this pays off huge when the time comes.
And
so
this is the time to do it, Rick.
And this is now. This is now the time. You don't have a lot of time, but you think days or many hours before it gets here. The clock is ticking, but you can do things. I mean, you can do things to help yourself and help your family. But if you're new to the area, especially, you've got to just inform yourself. If you haven't already done it, know what county you live in, know what your evacuation routes are. You've got to get spun up quickly here and empower yourself with knowledge. And
again, for those that are listening, we're doing the show on the 10th of September. The Landfall of Florence is due a little later this week in about 3 or 4 days. That's about the time frame we're talking about. And I think one thing people probably don't understand, and Brian Peters, we've been through this rodeo before down here with Gulf Coast hurricanes. It's conceivable there could be people in the path of Florence that will be without electricity, not for days, but for weeks. In this day and age, people don't think that's possible. Trust me. It's possible.
Check with Hurricane Maria victims.
Yeah.
They know.
What? In
months.
So imagine life without electricity and think about all the things that you will not be able to do. Your refrigerator's not working. You can't charge your phone. Your air conditioner doesn't work. If you have some type of machinery that you need to sustain your life for your health, that will not work if it's powered by commercial power. And all of these nice battery backups we have last for only so long. And if your power's out for 2 weeks, it is a real situation. And also with no power, that means gasoline stations, you go to put gas in your car, the pumps don't work. Everything in your normal life can be disrupted. And I mean everything. So that's the stuff that you need to think about. And there's no need to do it with fear. And I understand fear is a normal, natural human emotion. But instead of trying to be driven with fear at a time like this, you want to be driven by knowledge and purpose and a goal. And that goal is to establish a position for you and your family where you're not going to be suffering for days and not weeks. And so here's the next question for you guys. Marshall, what if we're wrong? What if this thing decides to whip a U offshore, and we don't have that much damage, we don't have that many power outages, we don't have any loss of life? Does that ever enter the equation for you? You're a nationally known guy. I mean, you followed all over the country. You ever think about that?
I do. Sorry. Hold on. I unplugged for a second.
Yeah, I do think about that, James, because we struggle already with this notion of cry wolf syndrome. That's part of the reason people say that they don't evacuate sometimes, because, oh, you guys hype up the storms for ratings or whatever, clickbait and whatnot. So, as soon as I saw, for example, one of the GFS solutions that kind of had this thing lingering off the coast, I was like, ooh, that caught my attention. I think Dr. Michael Ventris, who's, by the way, one of my favorite follows this time of year on Twitter, he actually mentioned this tonight, that there is still a very low chance that this thing could loof off and actually not make landfall. That's not the consensus position by any means, but that's certainly within the spectrum of possibility. And I think it perhaps does cause a hit to our community if it did do that. But, I think, as my colleague, Dr. Matt Sikowski, said the other day on Twitter, the goalpost is narrowing. And unless this does something extremely anomalous, I think we're within sort of the range where the track forecasts are pretty good within sort of 3 days or so, 3 to 4 days. So, but the reality is, if this thing didn't hit, you're going to have a lot of mad people. You're going to have a lot of mad evacuees. You're going to have policymakers asking questions. And that's the challenge and struggle that we deal with. I think our models and information is good enough that we probably have a handle on that right now. But the reality is, when you're trying to model a fluid on a rotating planet that's nonlinear processes using linearized equations in these models, there are going to be problems sometimes. There are going to be, inexact sort of sciences to this. But for the most part, I want to emphasize this, and we were talking about this earlier. The models have done pretty well. How long have we been talking about this thing? We've been talking about this thing for a while now, and it's kind of doing what we thought it would do. And at this point, I don't expect that to change.
Yep, I totally agree. I think the forecast confidence is high. That's the whole point of this. But looking back on Harvey, I bumped into Greg Carbon in St. Louis a couple of weeks ago at the NWA meeting, and we talked about just how good those QPF forecasts were. Marshall, remember how good those things were? And I don't think people believed them, but they nailed it days in advance. Those huge rain amounts.
Yeah, that's why I push back on people out there that say, well, we didn't know there was going to be this much rain. I've seen that in Twitter on Harvey and in various places. I was like, oh, yes, we did, because the WPC, the Weather Prediction Center, and NOAA QPF forecasts were spot on days before. Talking about 40, 50 inches of rain. Now, the struggle that we all had, and I don't know if James or you and any others were like me on this, the models were showing this, but it was so unbelievable. I think even we perhaps had a hard time believing it, but the model sniffed it out. And so we put it out there. I mean, the WPC had it out there. You were probably talking about it. I had it in my Forbes article. So it was out there, but did people really internalize or believe it? Maybe they were the same way we were. And so they just said, that's hyperbole.
Yep. So let's quickly here, before we take a break, let's discuss the rest of the tropics. Understand that Florence is not alone. We have a tropical trio. We have Helene, and I think we all agree that Helene is going to hang a right and no threat to land. Isaac, Brian Peters, you the man. You are our Gulf of Mexico tropical expert. You have been above, below, in it. What are your thoughts on Isaac?
Well, I'm happy to see that the indications are it should weaken a little as it comes into the Caribbean. That's always a positive feeling there. I guess this ridge we've had for a lot of the summer, I'm hoping will hold out if Isaac gets into the southeast Gulf, so that I don't want to send it to other people, but that it won't come to us.
Right. It's just funny. Yes. I'm telling people, what I'm saying is, yeah, watch Isaac, sure. But if it stays, a tropical storm, I think there's a fair chance this thing goes into Central America. People are kind of getting their eye off the ball here, because this Invest 95 is headed for Texas. And I do the weather on the radio down in McAllen, Texas, down in the lower valley down there. And they've had a lot of rain here in recent days, and they don't need any more. And I'm afraid that is going to be a bigger issue than Isaac for the Texas Gulf Coast, at least.
And I think you could be right. But like I say, the weakening of Isaac is certainly a positive sign as it comes into the Caribbean. So I hope that trend will continue.
Let's not forget about a hurricane out there in the Pacific. Also, the good friends in Hawaii are getting in the crosshairs again too. I believe it's Olivia.
Yeah, I noticed that one of the emergency Oahu EMA, they tweeted out they got a flash flood watch. Olivia is now a tropical storm, continues toward the Hawaiian Islands, and it's just going to be a lot of rain there. So really, the northern hemisphere is very active. Oftentimes, you'll see where the Atlantic goes quiet and the Pacific is very busy, or vice versa. But it sure looks like, Marshall, we've got a northern hemisphere full of action here.
We do, and even if you go over into the typhoon base there in the Western Pacific, there's activity as well. So this has been an interesting year, particularly as you remember earlier in the year, all the talk was about El Nino and what that was going to do, and we've certainly, all the projections were for a lower than normal, or lower or slightly near normal hurricane season, and it still may end up that that's the case. But as you noted earlier, this is the statistical peak of the season, and right now it's living up to that billing. But I've seen some long range projections that suggest once we get past this 1 to 2 peak period, it may go quiet again.
Yep. Let's hope. Marshall, can you stay with us for a few more minutes?
Absolutely.
If you have to. Okay, good. We're going to take a quick break here for Professor Peters and WeatherBrains 101, Tony Rice in the Astronomy Report, and we'll come back with our weather roundup. Of course, the whole show's been a weather roundup tonight. Wait, here's Aubrey. Wait a minute. Let me see. Aubrey, you want to do email now, or can you do that?
I don't even have my email ready. I do not.
Yeah. I was about to say, I know that you got so much going on here, but let's just, while you're there, your thoughts on Florence. Everybody else has talked about the impact. Your thoughts on what's going to happen in your world. And for those that don't know, Aubrey's in Harrisonburg, Virginia. She's not on the coast; she's inland, but she's got terrain issues and just. What do you see happening in your part of Virginia?
Yeah, so to be honest, I've actually even been mentioning this back after we picked up 10 inches in May. I just had this gut feeling that this was not going to be good. And if there's one year we don't need something to pop up in the fall, it was going to be this year. And then we got another 10 inches in June. I think I'm thinking 7 to 15 is what I'm thinking right now, on top of what we already have, especially with this stalling out potentially. I think this is going to be a catastrophic, potentially catastrophic event. And our rivers are already high. Our creeks are already high. A lot of people have experienced a lot of flooding this year. And here's also the big problem when you have a very high agriculture area and you get a hurricane impact in September. It is harvest season. Agriculture areas have already taken a huge hit. So now what they have left as far as corn, grapes, apples, everything, and that precious topsoil, one of your most valuable resources in the middle of harvest season.
Tell me about the population distribution there. How many folks live in flood-prone areas? What percentage of your population in the market do?
That I don't know off the top of my head, but we have several rivers and a lot of small tributaries. And of course you have, three basically main mountain regions and the foothills below that. So I don't know the percentage of the population, but there are a number
But not everybody lives up in those mountains. Apparently.
No, not everyone does. And Harrisonburg, Stanton, Waynesboro, one of our main cities, but it's called the River City because it's right there on the South River. And they typically, they flood. It could be 3 inches and they'll flood. So they were hit hard in 2003 with Isabel.
And if you're forecasting 15 inches, that doesn't sound good.
No, it's not. So right now the 15 is not technically the forecast, but that's if everything were to hold and it were to slow down a little bit more, I think that easily would be the forecast.
All right, so we'll do email next week. We're going to let Aubrey she's got a lot of irons in the fire tonight. But let's take a very quick break here. We're going to do Professor Peters, Tony Rice. We'll come back with picks of the week and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
WeatherBrains 101 with Professor Peters.
The water looks calm and peaceful with some small waves lapping the beach. Think the calm ocean is safe? Well, think again. Sneaker waves can strike seemingly without warning and have been responsible for numerous deaths in recent years. For much of the West Coast, sneaker waves kill more people than all other weather hazards combined. So what are sneaker waves? Sneaker waves are deadly, larger than average swells that can suddenly and without warning surge dozens of feet higher up the beach than expected, overtaking anyone who is not alert. They can break over rocks and lift logs on the beach with deadly force. Individuals caught in the path of these deadly waves can be pulled off the beach into frigid water and swift ocean currents. They're called sneaker waves because they often appear with no warning after long periods of quiet surf and much smaller waves, lulls that can last for 10 to 20 minutes. People arriving on the beach see the smaller waves and assume they are not going to run up on the beach any higher than what they are currently observing. Based on what they see, they get too close to the water and stop paying attention. It is this calm that lulls people into a sense of security. Survivors all say the same thing. They thought they were far enough from the surf to be safe. They never saw the wave coming. Some of these waves can surge more than 150 feet up the beach. If they're paying attention, a beachgoer may have a chance to outrun the wave, as some potential victims have, but usually they're not paying attention. Many uninformed individuals aren't expecting waves to suddenly run up to their thigh or waist, instantly filling their clothes with water, sand, and gravel. This watery mixture of sand and gravel trapped in their clothes weighs them down like concrete, rendering them powerless to keep from being dragged off the beach by the receding wave. Individuals dragged off the beach into the frigid waters of the Northwest are in danger of becoming victims of cold water paralysis, which can affect the limbs within minutes. So don't be fooled by an ocean that looks calm. There can be 10 to 20 minutes of small waves right before a sneaker wave strikes. Remember, never turn your back on the ocean. If you have a question about the weather, drop an email to question@weatherbrains.com.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
Yesterday, at about 7 a.m. Central, 8 a.m. Eastern, 2018 RC, an asteroid about the size of a passenger plane, passed Earth at about half the distance to the moon. It may sound close, and it is. It's the closest any object is expected to pass in the next 100 years. There's no danger of it hitting Earth, or even weather satellites out there in geostationary orbit. This asteroid whizzed by at about 140,000 miles away. Geosynchronous and geostationary satellites are significantly closer, at about 22 to 26,000 miles out. And that 100-year thing, don't hold me to it. That's based on what's currently known. More objects will certainly be found, and probably some passing even closer than this one. And this one was discovered only last week. Speaking of orbits, you know where your weather satellites are? They're all in geostationary orbit, which is a specific type of geosynchronous orbit that's directly above the equator. This vantage point is particularly good for seeing the same full disk view of the Earth on the side that you're most interested in at all times, day or night. To get to geosynchronous orbit, you just need to synchronize your spacecraft's orbital period, the time it takes to complete a single orbit, with Earth's rotational period. And no, that's not 24 hours. If you chose that, your weather satellite's going to be orbiting the sun eventually. Earth's orbital period is 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4 seconds, or a sidereal day. In addition to NOAA's GOES fleet, Europe's Meteosat, Japan's Himawari, India's INSAT, and China's Fenyuan are all in geosynchronous orbit to provide visible and infrared images of the changing atmosphere below. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
Thank you, Tony. Before we do the picks of the week here, let's go to Marshall. Marshall, plug your Weather Geeks podcast. How's it going? I've heard a few episodes. Sounds great.
Yes, it's actually doing well. You know, we decided to move it over to a podcast because the people like the brand, and the Weather Channel just wanted to reach a different demographic. They kind of know who watches their TV shows. The show still was one of the higher rated shows, but they wanted to reach a slightly different demographic and get us into a little more depth, because at the end of the day, we had about 18 minutes of time on the show in that slot. And so we just couldn't go deep. So with this podcast, we're able to go about 45 minutes or so. So it's doing great. We had a NASA administrator on, had Jan Knoll on recently. We've had I had astronaut Terry Virts on. So really go deep on that. So definitely check it out. You can check it out on iTunes and We Love Weather TV and where you get your favorite podcasts. I use the Stitcher app. I've become a podcast person. I was always familiar with your work and others, but I actually use the Stitcher app if you haven't used that app, and it can kind of collect all your favorite podcasts based on your listening habits. So doing well.
Yeah, Stitcher is a great app, but that's a great show. And I think, to me, you seem to enjoy the freedom of having the time.
Yes.
To me, that I could just tell you were so frustrated because your guests on TV were so good and so interesting, but yet you had the wrap-up thing. And now you don't have that problem.
Yeah, and that's actually right. And I think that's right. That was actually the biggest feedback we were getting from our viewers, if you will, of the show, is that there's not enough time, and just given the constraints of their programming, we couldn't add more time there. But also from a brand standpoint, there were some real requests there. Why don't you guys go to Weather Channel, do a podcast? So it worked for me because I also needed some things to free up I'm just got a lot of things going on. So this kind of works for me timing wise a little bit better too.
All right, so let's talk about the University of Georgia Atmospheric Science Program. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going very well. I laugh because it's going too well in some ways. Something happened about 2 years ago, or a little under 2 years ago. We went from a certificate program, which was a 31-hour certificate, by the way. So even if someone held our certificate, it was just like a degree. But the Board of Regents in the state of Georgia, we wrote a proposal and now are a full major. We went within 2 years from about 25 to 30 on average per year certificates to now we're approaching 60 majors in our program in just 2 years. So it's creating some interesting challenges for me as the director of the program in terms of resources. But hey, I hate to mention this, but I know one of our former students is now in your market over there. So Matt Daniel. So give a shout out.
Yeah, Matt's a good guy. He looped through here a while back. He's a great guy. So
yeah, he is. He's a big fan of yours.
Showing up all over the country.
Yeah, he's a big fan and he's someone that really does well for our program. But we've got. The point I want to make about our program is people ask about the university. When I first came to UGA back in 2005 from NASA, I spent 12 years at NASA before UGA, people would say, well, wait a minute, you're going to Georgia Tech, is that right? Because everybody was more familiar with their program. Fast forward 12 years, nobody asks that anymore. People are very aware of University of Georgia's program, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
Well, it's very impressive, and every time I visit the campus, I'm more impressed each time, so you've done a great job. But let's do picks of the week here, because I am the lead on the late news over here, so I got to go get on the TV clothes and do that. So let's start with Aubrey. Do you have for us? I noticed initially you were going to go with the foghorn. We need to have a backwards foghorn because you don't have one. You actually got a pick tonight.
Yeah, I do. So, of course, Tropical Tidbits, one of the, with Levi Cowan's site, one of the best resources, and his recon data page on Tropical Tidbits, very good resource. Hurricane hunters were just in Florence getting some of their data. So we're awaiting the 11 o'clock update, but cool page with some of the resources there from the hurricane hunters.
And for those that are new to this, we have all the links on our website, weatherbrains.com, thanks to Mr. Brian Peters. And speaking of Mr. Brian Peters, what is your absurd pick of the week?
I think this one may have been used before, James, and maybe by me, but it's one that I think deserves some referencing as a resource. It's the National Data Buoy Center. So if you wonder where those buoys are out there, whether it's the Gulf or the southeast, off the southeast coast, they've got a very nice website, and you can click on them and find out what the latest conditions are.
Awesome. And again, the link will be up on weatherbrains.com. Mine, it's that marvelous Colorado State.edu domain site that's got this Ghost 16 imagery that is just so cool, and it's so flexible, and you can do so much with it. And again, if you're looking for really good, crisp, high-resolution looks at tropical systems, I would suggest starting here. And we'll put the link up on weatherbrains.com. All right. Rick, what is your pick of the week, sir?
My pick of the week is just a tweet, but it's a tweet from our friend Taylor Trogdon, who works in the surge unit at the National Hurricane Center. He did a really nice tweet, kind of encapsulating what we talked about a little while ago about taking care of yourselves as meteorologists, how this is going to be a long stretch and physical and mental health matters. So I'm really glad that is being discussed more openly now. We do have a really cool session coming up at AMS, an early plug for the AMS annual meeting in January, but we're planning something really cool, a session all devoted to this topic. So my pick of the week is Taylor's tweet that talks about that.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I don't think I've ever decompressed after what happened down here in 2011. It doesn't make any sense to people, but I just don't think I've decompressed. And I think everybody at some point needs to do that. And, I'm very interested in mental health, and that's great. That's a great pick. And I'm glad people are thinking about that. All right, Dr. Shepard, we've stalled to give you time to get a pick together. What you got for us?
Oh, in terms of, I didn't know I was coming. I thought Weather Geeks was my pick. I'll give you another.
Well, no,
one.
that can be your pick. Anything you've talked about.
No, I'll give you another one. I mean, and maybe you've shared it before, but I'm pretty partial to the SIMS tropical page, CIMSS. It's a page out of University of Wisconsin. Also has some really good information. You can sort of overlay wind shear, satellite-derived products as well. So I would say in terms of my tropical sites, which is where I'm going right now, of course, Tropical Tidbits is always on the top of my list as well. But if you haven't checked out that SIMS tropical page, definitely check that out. It's very useful.
Right. You know that one, Brian. If not, we'll get you the link there. All right, awesome. So again, we're gonna have to wrap up the show a smidgen early this week. So Marshall, for people that want to follow you on the Twitter, what's your Twitter ID? For those
Twitter.
I think the whole world follows you, but in case somebody doesn't.
No, they don't. I'm still nowhere near James Spann numbers, but I'm at Dr. Shepard 2013, and Shepard is spelled like shepherd in the Bible, or if you're herding sheep. So at Dr. Shepard 2013. You can also follow. I have a public Facebook page out there as well. Just Google my Facebook as well, and I'm actually on Instagram too at Marsh4FSU.
There you go. So go follow Marshall. He is I call him the president of the University of Common Sense of the Weather Enterprise. I'm trying to get him run for president of the United States, but I don't know if he's ever going to do that. But we got to wrap this thing up here because I have got to go do some television. We are typically on the air every Monday night at 9:30 Eastern. And for those that watch live, many of them gather together at live.bigbrainsmedia.com. Many of you listen. Most of you listen. And we thank you for that. If you want to send us an email, and we'll do an email segment next week, Aubrey. We're going to give you the night off tonight. You're busy. Email at weatherbrains.com. And our social media accounts are over there as well. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and God bless. And stay safe if you're on the coast of the Carolinas.
Yes, you guys, thanks a lot for having me.
Marshall, thank you. You are awesome for coming on the show. Thanks, everybody.
Always good to see you, Dr. Shepard.
Yep, see y'all. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
We'll see you
Good
guys
luck,
next
Aubrey.
week. Bye bye.